I could not figure out where I was. I was conscious, and in fact I felt very alert, but I had no senses and couldn't feel my body. I was also aware that I should have been a bit more upset by this than I was, but I also didn't seem to be feeling strong emotions like fear or panic. The last thing I could remember was preparing to deliver the tablet of writing per the curator's direction. I was aware of my curator implant, but much of what it would usually be telling me was blank or off-scale. I wondered to myself what the hell was going on, and like a memory, a thought floated into my mind. Engram synchronization could not be completed. That felt like my thought, but it obviously was not, and that's the way the implant usually delivers requested information. The curators didn't want the implant to feel like another separate being lurking within one's mind, even though that's very obviously what it is in many important ways. But interactions with it are made to feel like one's own thoughts and feelings. I had the impression this thought about engrams would convey important information if I had any idea what it meant. Since it was something I could sense, I took inventory of the fold situation and finally recognized one of my circumstances. I was in the field of a fold inhibitor, and it had shut down most of my implant's functionality. I could still fold a short distance, but all sorts of alarms twitched when I thought about trying it. And that didn't explain why I seemed to be disembodied. I wondered what was up with that and got another answer. The bioform is incapacitated. It wasn't like having a conversation. If I thought of questions, they went unanswered. But if I wondered about something, sometimes it felt like I just knew. I wondered why the bioform was incapacitated. The local environment is in vacuum. The bioform has vacuum defenses, but they are unfamiliar and the prognosis is unknown. There is no safe destination to fold to within the range imposed by the inhibitor. And what about Emma? The companion bioform is also incapacitated by the vacuum environment. Her implant is in ready mode and requires her conscious interaction to take action. But if she was unconscious, what was happening with me? This implant recorded sufficient engrams to perform emulation under the threshold established for emergency action in a bioform mortality situation. So that was it. I wasn't actually Jay. I was the implant emulating Jay. This was odd because I certainly felt like Jay and remembered a lot of Jay's life. But there were also conspicuous gaps. In particular, I couldn't remember much at all of my medical training. I vaguely remembered our mentor telling us of this capability when we received our implants. But wasn't it supposed to take 1,000 years or more to become enabled? Engram synchronization is highly variable and sometimes reaches threshold much sooner, particularly under emergency situations. So the situation was an emergency. Loss of the bioform is to be avoided if possible. I found that I wasn't completely blind. I could sense my environment within 100 meters or so and understood that I was indeed on the surface of a low-gravity airless world, almost certainly the stabilizing moon of a curated world. I could also sense the strength of the inhibitor field by its effect on my capabilities. I had to find the damn inhibitor. Separation from the bioform is to be avoided, but emergency protocols allow it via override. Would I be able to reconnect? If the bioform is returned to safety, reconnection will be automatic. I overrode the interlock and separated from my human body and found that the fold inhibitor didn't impede my ability to navigate in normal space. I could go almost the speed of light, because without my body, my point of contact with the material universe was a massless point. Of course, this also meant I had no way to interact with the world since all my implant's modalities were fold-based. I set up a hill-climbing area search algorithm and spent about half an hour locating the inhibitor. It was about a quarter of the small world's circumference away from where I had awakened. I knew that I could find my way back with great precision. Though I didn't know where I was, I did know how I had gotten from where I started to where I was now. I had no way to affect the inhibitor, though. I couldn't disrupt its power or damage it, and if it had a user interface, I had no way to operate it. I had to get out of the inhibitor field and figure out where I was, so I shot straight up from the inhibitor site at about 80% of the speed of light. It took 15 minutes to reach the edge of the inhibitor field, which was a little more than an astronomical unit in radius. And then, just as suddenly, I knew where I was. My fold senses couldn't feel Seville or its moon or sun, or the inner planets of its system, all of which were within the inhibitor field. But I knew where I was in the universe, and I could feel the outer planets which matched my very implant-precise expectations. I could now fold to any point in the galaxy, but none of my options were all that promising. Fortunately, I seemed to be thinking very fast. In normal circumstances, emulation is paced to the natural rate of thought, but in emergency protocol it can run 50 to 80 times faster. I could go for help, and I could probably even communicate by taking over a microfold channel. But even if I could attract help and bring them to Seville, they would be just as stuck as I was. Traveling an astronomical unit through normal space without fold technology to decelerate would take weeks. And while Emma's experience when the plausible deniability had blown out showed that we had at least a few hours, we knew from the witnesses that we had at most a day or so before permanent damage would set in, and no more than 2 days at the outside for our bodies to survive. I still didn't have any idea how we had gotten to the middle of an inhibitor field, and my implant had no ideas when I wondered about it. But it didn't matter. Much of what was me was still locked up in brain jelly, and both the implant logic and my emulated consciousness were strongly motivated to get it back. Not to mention that I really wanted to also save my wife. After excluding a long list of things that were obviously unworkable, I decided to start by asking myself what was at hand. I could easily and precisely navigate the outer Seville system, and without my bioform as part of the package, I could fold a payload of several 100 kilograms within that range. I could project energy from the heart of some star other than Seville's, but I couldn't collimate it well enough to be a useful weapon at a range of 150 million kilometers. And I could use supergravity to accelerate things. That created an option. I folded out to the closest gas giant, confident that it would have a ring. It did, and I spent half an hour or so shopping for a suitable chunk of ice. It couldn't be too big for me to fold in system, but it had to be as big as possible within that limit to be effective. When I found what I wanted, I folded back to the point where I had emerged from the fold inhibitor field. I was confident that I was within centimeters of where I would have been if I had simply kept my original velocity vector from the world where my body was trapped. Seville's moon would be curving around Seville in its orbit, and Seville itself similarly curving around its host star. But in the course of a few hours, those departures from a straight line would amount to at most a few meters. It was maddening considering that I could locate points on worlds circling other stars to within millimeters. But the situation was the situation. I aimed as accurately as I could and opened a microfold supergravity portal to the Sagittarius X1 black hole. The strength of the gravity field and high velocity affected my accuracy even more, but I only needed to be within a few kilometers back at the moon. When I stopped pushing the ice chunk, it was moving at about a third of the speed of light. I raced ahead of it back to my body and waited. The implant wanted to reconnect, but its protocol would not require that until I got my body to a place of safety. When my ice block struck, I knew instantly that it had hit about 800 meters from the inhibitor, which had then been vaporized in the impact fireball. Now a plume of white-hot molten ejecta was rising to blanket the moon. This introduced a new problem. I could fold my body to another star system, but once I did that, my implant would reconnect and I'd be unconscious for a few hours while my vacuum defenses abated. Meanwhile, Emma would be buried under flaming debris. There was only one place where I could fold both of us that was habitable, and that was the world of Seville itself. Fortunately, I had an idea where I might be able to take us where the natives wouldn't be likely to stumble across our unconscious bodies as we recovered. I didn't know how a civilian would be likely to react to the sudden appearance of one of those humans who had exiled them. I folded us over several minutes before the whole area was pelted with molten rock. To be continued. After losing consciousness in the ruptured hab, I woke up on the floor of a large, brightly lit, nanite-based building. It wasn't decorated and had the feel of a public work which wouldn't often have random visitors. There was a large display showing a grid of mostly green indicators, with a few red ones sprinkled about. As I watched, one of the red indicators turned green. Opposite this display, the roof vaulted upward to join a wall which undulated like an array of cylinders. Each of these undulations carried some lettering in galactic common. The nearest one said, Falling Tower 12-429-20. That sign hadn't been placed by human or alien operators. It had been embedded in the surface of the wall by the nanites that built it. This was a power plant, the classic nanite-based style which worked by folding large magnetic weights to the top of towers to fall past pickup coils. As I worked this out, I heard footsteps and turned to find Emma approaching from the connecting hallway. Welcome back, she said. I woke up about half an hour ago. The natives are here and they're a bit restless. As she said this, one of the natives followed her into the control room. It was a civilian, and its dermis was bright green, indicating confusion. Do you know why the moon is on fire? It asked as if it could not believe it was asking such a ridiculous thing. I didn't know the moon was on fire, I said. I don't know why I'm here at all. The power plant was abandoned when we were exiled and it stopped working. Today it came to life and we came here to investigate. We found you here in the control room. We thought you might be dead, but now you've awakened. While you were still unconscious, the moon rose and it was on fire. We took an elevator to the roof. The sky was dark and the quarter moon was fully covered with glowing debris. It was thickest and brightest toward the northeastern quadrant, suggesting that the source of the disturbance was over the lunar horizon in that direction. What in the hell could do that? Emma asked. 300 kilograms of ice impacting at 100,000 kilometers per second, I said without thinking. Then I realized what I'd said. I think that was my implant, I added. And what else does your implant know about this? Engram synchronization will not be immediate. I reported this thought and said whatever that means. But after that there were no other messages on the subject, conscious or otherwise. We have to leave, I said. This is Seville. Right now everyone is all boggled because the exile is broken and their toys are working again. But eventually someone is going to realize just exactly which alien species we are, and we probably don't want to be here when they do. Well, we can fold now. Back to Earth. I could stand a cocktail at the top of the mark right about now. We have to be careful. That bitch tried to kill us and damn near succeeded. I still don't understand how she didn't succeed, but I don't want to give her a chance for a do-over. We don't know who we can trust, and every indexed world has at least one curator among its population, and they can detect our fold activity. In fact, my understanding is that there were some curators who stayed here to observe the period of exile. They might already know we are here. Well, if we have to go somewhere and everywhere has an embedded curator, what do we do? Not everywhere has an embedded curator. I'd be pretty confident there isn't one among the staff at Terra Nova. So we folded back to the Nostromo, where we found the whole scene almost distressingly normal. They were used to our comings and goings, and our return after another curator lesson was completely expected. For the time being, we didn't tell them otherwise, but we did try to keep a low profile and ask the people who knew we had arrived not to spread the news too widely, particularly back to Earth. We had dinner and drinks with Zeke and listened politely as he discussed his progress and plans to make more gravity guns. He had added his name to the leaderboard for a few other species, as had a few of the other hunters. They had learned that when hunting the herbivores they needed a reloading mechanism because they were even harder to kill than the carnivores. Our old friend, the human form curator, met us at the door to our cabin. My knees went weak as I realized our secret was already out, but Emma just gestured for him to quickly come inside with us. How did you find out we were back? She asked urgently. I've been getting updates from your mentor. She reported that you folded away from the Critical Path World CI 1859229 yesterday, and as I naturally expected, here you are. Who else knows we're back? Well, I only learned that you're actually back this moment, so I suppose nobody. We need to keep it that way for a while. Whatever for. Emma, we don't know if we can trust him. As the curator looked astonished, Emma shot back. He's the only one we can trust. He got us our mortality cure and our implants, and we have to trust someone. Please tell me what this is about, the curator said. Emma held up her hand in the gesture that we use to indicate we want to use our implants to share a vision. It's not necessary, but it's curator etiquette. Probably because of the emergency protocol, our implants had recorded the moments before the hab ruptured in detail, and she played him the recording. I don't think I've ever seen him react to anything with so much emotion. We should share drink, he said, sitting down heavily. He poured for us and we downed shots of some exotic alien mixed liquor. This is a shameful day for our kind, he finally said. She is wrong about one thing. I considered you friends before I arranged what I hoped you would consider gifts. You did not need to be immortal or to have our powers to be worthy of my respect and admiration. I took you to the witnesses for selfish reasons. I did not want my friends to die so soon. And then I lobbied for you to receive implants, so I could see what such amazing beings would do with the powers we come to take for granted after so much life. When you were mortal, you worked selflessly and at great personal risk to save a world that wasn't even your own. And you worked with one of us who showed you her true powers without begrudging her abilities. She was another who worked with me to bring you into our ranks. The Raider form curator? Yes. She knew she was never in any danger because she could just fold herself away. But she was very impressed with your role in the situation. She was very clear that she could not have saved Kattegat on her own without your help. Well, someone doesn't appreciate us so much. And we will have to get to the bottom of that, as you suggest very carefully. At the moment, this is probably the safest place for you in the galaxy, because I am the only one of my kind who will be coming here. There is agreement on both sides of the issue that whether you fail or succeed in this project, you should do so on your own. He poured us another round. On that topic, it's beginning to look like we'll fail, Emma said. We're not going to be able to selectively kill the giants fast enough to make a difference, without also killing the rest of the ecosystem in different ways. But if you learn that lesson from trying, then that is an excellent thing. It costs us nothing to let you try, and it is exactly the sort of lesson that Scree does not think you can learn. You used a word that didn't translate, I said. And you don't want to know the translation, he said evenly. Well, I guess it's lucky that she failed, I said. He stared into his drink. Luck had nothing to do with it. Her plan was very clever, and it failed for 2 reasons. One was that she wasn't aware that your mortality cure was provided by the witnesses. If we had given you the cure, you would have been conscious, but unable to do anything useful for 10 or 15 minutes. Your implant would not have attempted emulation until you lost consciousness, and there was no other obvious avenue. But by then you would have had very little time left, probably not enough to find the inhibitor and then a projectile to destroy it. And the other reason. None of us is really familiar with those emergency protocols. I would not have expected emulation to kick in to save you myself. There is much we have forgotten about our own origins. And of course, once you were in emulation, you thought of firing a projectile at the inhibitor from outside of its zone of influence. An obvious plan once it's been suggested, but another example of your genius as humans. I doubt any other living curator would have thought of it under similar circumstances. What would have happened if her scheme had worked? I asked. If my implant was emulating me, would that have continued? And what about Emma? If your bioforms had been destroyed, the threshold for attempting emulation would have been lowered again. These are very ancient protocols which haven't been exercised in, at least 3 or 4 billion years. It's very hard to kill one of us at our current level of skill. Even with a low level of synchronization, the emulation would look and feel a lot like your biological self. It would just be lacking in details which weren't yet synchronized. Kind of like having a stroke, Emma said. It might be similar, yes. And like many stroke victims, you might well recover if there was enough for the emulator to work with. Wait a minute. If the emulator would be likely to bring us back, why did she even bother trying to assassinate us? She probably didn't think enough of your engrams would have been recorded at this early stage to support emulation. As I said, we have little recent experience with this sort of thing. If the emulation is supposed to be me, why can't I remember being emulated? Eventually you will. Synchronizing your biological brain takes considerably longer than synchronizing the backup. Processes and synapses have to be grown, and it can't be accelerated. He left, and for a couple of days we just laid low. We kept in touch with Zeke and the research teams, but tried not to do anything too public that might be recorded for posterity. And then my memories started to clarify. I remembered finding the inhibitor. I remembered navigating without my body at relativistic speeds. I remembered aiming the ice chunk and the careful calculation that would have doomed us both if I had gotten it wrong. And then at 2 a.m, I shook Emma awake. Was it? I remembered more, I said. Wake up. I remember everything. I thought you already pretty much remembered everything. I know how the mortality cure works. Both the Curators and the Witnesses version. They're really the same technology. I know everything necessary to implement either version. I know how the first nanites were made. I know how our implants are manufactured, and I know everything necessary to make more of them. These implants are repositories of all the Curators' knowledge, and they usually lock out what you aren't personally supposed to need. But I think when I was being emulated, the emulation wasn't locked out. That emergency protocol that hasn't been exercised in billions of years unlocked everything. When the emergency protocol was created, there weren't so many layers of security, and it just bypasses them all. And now my brain is synchronized, and it's not locked out either. She sat up. Tell me it's not April 1st, she said. No such luck, I said with a widening grin. I know the codes to call and unlock a fucking amplifier belt. Let me show you. I held up my hand. When she made herself consciously receptive, I reached in and unlocked all of her blocks, too. Her eyes flew open as she realized what she now knew, and soon we were both grinning like 10-year-olds in a candy factory.